Have you ever noticed that your money doesn't stretch as far as it used to? Maybe you've said to yourself, "Wow, groceries feel so much more expensive than last year." Or, "My rent keeps climbing, but my paycheck looks the same." That's not just bad luck or greedy landlords, that's inflation. Now most people know inflation as prices going up. And yes, that's what you feel day to day. But in reality, inflation isn't just about prices rising, it's about money itself losing power. A dollar today buys you less than a dollar did 10, 20, or 50 years ago. So let's break it down. What exactly is inflation? Why does it happen? How do we measure it? And maybe the most important question of all, is it always bad? What inflation really means. At its core, inflation is simply the decline of purchasing power. If a loaf of bread cost $1 last year and it costs $1.10 today, that's inflation. Your dollar just lost some of its ability to buy things. Over time, this adds up dramatically. Think about it. In the 1970s, you could buy a new car in the US for under $3,000. Today, the average new car costs over $45,000. The car didn't become 15 times better. Money became weaker. Why does inflation happen? Economists usually point to three big forces. Let's go through them with simple examples. 1. Demand pull inflation. This is when there's too much money chasing too few goods. Imagine it's the holiday season and everyone wants the hottest new toy. Stores can't keep up with demand, so prices skyrocket. The toy didn't magically become more valuable. It's just that buyers outnumber the supply. On a bigger scale, this happens in the economy when consumers are flush with cash, credit is easy, and people are spending faster than businesses can produce. 2. Cost push inflation. This happens when it becomes more expensive to make things. If oil prices go up, transportation costs rise. If raw materials get pricier, everything built with them follows. Businesses don't just absorb those costs, they pass them on to customers. Think about gas prices. If filling your car suddenly costs 30% more, that doesn't just hurt your wallet directly, it also makes food more expensive because trucks delivering goods use gas. That's cost push inflation rippling through the system. 3. Monetary inflation. This one comes down to money supply. When central banks print more money or inject massive liquidity into the system, each unit of money is worth a little less. Imagine you're playing Monopoly, and suddenly someone adds another stack of bills to the game. The board doesn't have more properties, the money just becomes less scarce. This is what people mean when they say, "Money printer, go brrr." During crises, governments often create huge amounts of new money to keep economies from collapsing. But once that money enters the system, it can dilute the value of the money already out there. In reality, inflation is usually a messy mix of all three: strong demand, higher production costs, and an expanded money supply working together. How we measure inflation. Governments typically use something called the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. The idea is simple. Imagine a basket filled with everyday items: groceries, housing, transportation, healthcare, clothing, and more. Statisticians check the price of that basket each month. If the total cost goes up by 5% in a year, then the official inflation rate is 5%. But here's the catch: CPI is only an average, and averages can be misleading. If your rent rises by 10%, but the price of electronics falls by 2%, the index might show moderate inflation, while you personally feel like you're drowning. That's why people often say inflation feels way higher than the government numbers. Another issue: CPI often excludes big assets like houses or stocks. Yet for most people, housing is their largest expense. This is why debates about real inflation can get heated. Is inflation always bad? Here's a surprising twist. A little inflation is actually considered good. Most central banks aim for around 2% per year. Why? Because if money loses just a tiny bit of value each year, people are encouraged to spend and invest it instead of hoarding cash. That keeps the economy moving. Imagine if prices were falling every year. You'd wait to buy things, businesses would sell less, and the economy would stall. So moderate inflation greases the wheels of economic activity. It rewards investment and keeps growth alive. But of course, there's a danger zone: the dangers of high inflation. When inflation gets too high, it erodes savings, hurts workers, and destabilizes economies. Take Weimar Germany in the 1920s. The government printed massive amounts of money to pay war debts. At the peak, prices were doubling every few days. People carried cash in wheelbarrows just to buy bread. Money lost meaning, or Zimbabwe in the 2000s. Hyperinflation got so bad that they issued $100 trillion banknotes, and those still weren't enough to buy basic groceries. In both cases, the core issue was trust. Once people stop trusting money, the entire economy collapses. Deflation, the other extreme. Now, the opposite of inflation is deflation, when prices consistently fall. At first, that sounds amazing, cheaper stuff. But deflation is like quicksand for an economy. If people expect prices to drop, they delay purchases. Why buy a car today if it will be cheaper next year? But if everyone waits, businesses earn less, they cut jobs, incomes fall, and the economy spirals downward. Japan experienced something close to this in the 1990s, decades of sluggish growth, partly because of persistent deflationary pressures. This is why central banks fear deflation almost as much as hyperinflation. Central banks and inflation control. So who's in charge of managing inflation? In most countries, it's the central bank. In the US, that's the Federal Reserve. They mainly use two levers, interest rates and money supply. If inflation is too high, they raise interest rates. That makes borrowing more expensive, which cools down spending and slows the economy. If inflation is too low, they lower rates or add money into the system, which encourages people to borrow, spend, and invest. It's a delicate balancing act. Move too aggressively, and you risk causing a recession. Move too slowly, and inflation can spiral out of control. Why inflation feels personal. Even if the official number is, say, 4%, your personal inflation might feel like 10%. Why? Because inflation doesn't hit everyone equally. If you're a renter, rising housing costs might dominate your budget. If you're a parent, education and healthcare might eat up more of your money each year. On the other hand, if you spend most of your income on electronics or clothes, categories that sometimes get cheaper, inflation might feel milder. This difference between headline inflation and felt inflation explains why conversations about the cost of living are often so emotional. Let's bring this down to real life. A $50 grocery trip in 2000 might cost you $90 today. A movie ticket in the 1980s was under $3. Today, it's closer to $15 in many cities. The minimum wage in the US hasn't kept pace. In 1968, the federal minimum wage was about $1.60, but adjusted for inflation, that's equivalent to more than $13 today. The actual minimum wage is still $7.25. That gap shows how inflation and wages don't always move together. These examples remind us, inflation doesn't just change numbers. It changes lifestyles, opportunities, and generational wealth. So let's recap. Inflation means your money buys less over time. It's driven by demand, by rising costs, and by the supply of money. We measure it with tools like CPI, though those numbers don't tell the whole story. A little inflation is healthy, but too much or too little can destabilize economies. And while governments try to manage it, how you personally feel inflation depends on your unique situation, your rent, your bills, your lifestyle. So the next time you notice prices creeping up, remember, it's not just the price of goods that's changing, it's the value of money itself shrinking. And this matters because inflation shapes everything, from how much you pay for dinner, to whether you can buy a house, to how nations manage their debts. Now you understand inflation more deeply than most people ever will. But this is just one piece of the puzzle. In our next video, we'll explore recessions, what really causes them, and why they seem to come around every decade like clockwork. If you want to truly understand how money works, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode of Money Explained.